Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Constant Way, and today we're kicking off a series looking at each hero in Judgement Eternal Champions, broken down by class, giving a general overview of each hero, highlighting any special synergies that really help them perform, calling out any cautions you should keep in mind when including them in your warband. You can see all 33 heroes available at launch on the right, grouped by what I consider their primary class. Now, Judgement doesn't require you to take some number of heroes from each class, but you'll often find that bringing heroes from various classes gives you a diverse toolbox to work with on the tabletop. This video series is meant to help you go a little bit deeper, highlighting the unique contributions each hero brings to the table, and justifying why you'd want to pick one over the other from the same class rather than just picking all the champions of your god. First up, tanks. More than being just sturdy beefcakes, tanks serve the important role of anchoring around important board elements and keeping your other heroes alive. If you watched my warband construction video, you'll remember that board presence is one of the key considerations for crafting your path to victory. If you can't contest soul pits, shrines, or hold forward ground, you're going to be on the back foot when it comes to harvesting souls and threatening your opponent's effigy. Tanks are best suited to ticking that board presence box, thanks to their own personal durability, as well as their abilities that protect nearby friendly heroes. Also, tanks can often serve as backup soul gazers. All but Doenregar have a 4 for their soul harvest stat, so with just one additional friendly hero nearby, they have pretty good odds of successfully harvesting a soul themselves, since they're often positioned to contest and control soul pits. Now, how could we start a tank breakdown with anyone other than the OG Meatwall himself, Doenregar? Also known as the Don, or Donnie, Doenregar's greatest strength is his personal survivability, thanks to his naturally high hit points, regeneration, and most importantly, his ability Stone Form, which drops his agility to 1, but increases his res to 3, higher than any other res in the game, and makes him immune to throw, knockdown, and pushes. This makes him especially difficult to damage or dislodge from an important board position, and even harder to kill him in 1 or 2 rounds without having really specialized armor cracking or burst damage dealers. Now, Donnie's protection for his team comes in the form of a once per turn redirection, is where he takes the hit instead of the one from going onto a nearby ally. Also, his Stone Grasp Fade ability, which helps make it difficult for opponents to get away from him. And in the unlikely event he reaches level 3, his Healing Wave ability, which is a little burst AoE heal around him. Now, his unique callout is his crits deal 5 damage, which crosses an important threshold of being equivalent to 1 soul's worth of damage to an enemy effigy. Since each soul harvested takes 4 max HP off an effigy, if you land the crit, you're taking an equivalent of a soul's worth of damage from the effigy. That's useful for finishing the game with a charge from Doenregar, who's likely to be very far up on the front line and in threat range of the effigy. This is particularly relevant considering the gods he's a champion of, where in Ista he can fly over intervening heroes on the effigy power turn, or in Gruul you can equip him with Gruul's sacred artifact, the Staff of Gruul, which gives him an additional 1 hex reach, and again, makes it really difficult to stop him from getting on important target like an effigy. Now, the Staff of Gruul is a good idea if you're taking him in Gruul, but otherwise he doesn't really need any levels or items to do his job. He just sort of anchors in place and exists as a big old pile of hit points. He synergizes well with other heroes who like to use health, such as Zyvera or Kayn, since he's got plenty to spare and can regenerate. But he hates being lit on fire, which would stop his regeneration. So watch out for Astariel and other fire-dealing heroes, and also burst heroes like we mentioned before, like Zonia, Rakir, or a level 3 Brock, who with Molten Metal can really cause a meltdown for Stoneform Doenregar. Next up, Lugdrug. Now, Lugdrug's an interesting tank. He's a little bit limited when it comes to the protection he offers, which might be a little deceptive when you see his ward and think, oh man, he's got all these ward abilities that he can use to keep a very important hero alive. And while that's true, the main catch with the ward ability is that it only works if you're immediately adjacent to the ward. So it's possible for the opponent to push Ward away from Lugdrug, and at that point, you've only got you can't use any more Ward abilities. So you have to consider, okay, if I redirect the attack from the Ward to Lugdrug, well, they're going to be able to push Lugdrug away, and then I can't use my plus res ability from Ward, and vice versa. If you do the plus res, they can just push the Ward away. So it's a little bit deceptive. His protection abilities are a little bit limited. You can also use stun to lower the incoming damage, essentially denying actions to your opponent, but otherwise that's about it when it comes to protection. Realistically, the energy mechanic from his repulsor shield is his big selling point. This amps his already solid 4 agi, 2 res personal survivability stat line because he gets these energy tokens when he gets attacked, which unlocks the energy thrust and energy blast abilities that he gets to do essentially for free with energy tokens. So in general, people don't want to attack him. It also means that he can almost always disengage. If he stuns one target, they can't make parting blows, and he can use energy thrust to push away another enemy that's engaging him, and then he can recall. And realistically, he's tanky enough that even if he doesn't get to do all of those things and has to take one parting blow to back away, maybe recall, maybe he's carrying a bunch of souls, that's fine for him. He can do that. Another nice call out for Lugdrug, again related to the energy tokens, is his energy blast ability. This is a unique ability in that for 0 actions, as long as you have an energy token, you can inflict a little bit of damage, 1 true damage, and burn on an enemy target. Burn's a very potent ability. This is essentially either you're taxing your opponent of fate because they have to cleanse the burn, or you're getting 3 free true damage at minimal cost to you. This combos particularly well with, say, Astariel, likes it when enemies are on fire so that she can conflagrate more of them. And his other damage steroid opportunity is when he starts to level up. So when he gets to his level 2, he starts adding attack dice to his ward if he is also engaging the target his ward is attacking. And at level 3, he starts adding damage when his ward is attacking the same target that he's engaged by. You need to plan for getting him these levels if you plan on trying to make use of those ward abilities, since he doesn't organically get them himself. But if you do, then he pairs extraordinarily well with heroes who get multiple attacks per action. For example, Brock via backswing, the dual wield heroes like Drogoth or Cradle. Next up, Marcus. Marcus is probably the best sort of vanilla protector in general. He again has that solidly durable 4 agi, 2 res personal defensive stat line. But then he has protective stance, where he can grant 1 res to a friendly hero. This is particularly effective. You can give it to a hero that already has res to make them res 2. Res 2 gets you to sort of a tipping point of if an enemy hero needs a maneuver, so for example, like a 2S maneuver, and has to damage, then they have to roll they have to roll at least a solid for most of their damage track lines, because most damage is 2, 3, 4. And so you have to roll both the dice for the maneuver and enough dice to get the solid in order to be able to use the maneuver. So this is particularly helpful for heroes like, say, Rakir, who need that 2S to toxin but also need to damage, so they can't get a glance and do the toxin or do the poison for toxin. And then he also brings his fate ability, his Wall of Ice, which lets him place down a wall. And this can help control objectives. You can actually place it around, say, a shrine, so that your opponent has to walk around the wall to get next to the shrine, so that you can control that objective. And, of course, limit your opponent's charge options if they don't have Pathfinder to go over the wall, or give yourself cover. Now, he doesn't really need items or levels. He's pretty functional with his full kit at level 1. You want to remember his level 2 Winter's Bite ability or his level 3 Blizzard ability if you happen to get it, but there's no real reason to build for it. So he's pretty low on the level, item, and even fate priority list. The final call out that I want to make is his knockdown combat maneuver, and this is probably why you're taking him, aside from his general protective abilities, is he's really a damage enabler. He's a hit fixer for friendly models who really want more dice. So the main call out with that is he does have to damage in order to get the knockdown, and the damage stat line on his shield's 1, 2, 3. Not great if you're going into heroes with res. So consider what you're targeting with that shield bash and that knockdown, so that you can make sure you can pull it off. Next up, Onkura. Now, Onkura is a little bit unique. She's, I would say, more focused than some of the other, or maybe more niche than some of the other tanks. She's an anti-melee debuffing tank with solid brawling capabilities. Just as a call out, she's particularly good in Tauren, since Tauren, as an effigy power, lets you damage yourself to deal more damage to the enemy, but since she has Leech, it only costs her essentially 1 health, net 1 health, to get +2 damage. So that's a particularly nice little synergy. Of course, in Tomas, her weakening blow combat maneuver also becomes 1s on the effigy power turn, so that's pretty good. But I personally like her in Tauren a bit more. Now, we mentioned the debuffs. She's got Contagion, Bell of Doom, and Weakening Blow. These are all unique debuffs, so if you've got anything else that's applying penalties like freeze or poison or things like that, they'll stack with them, and so you can really debuff somebody into uselessness, which is pretty funny when you hit, say, Brock with Contagion and Weakening Blow, and suddenly he's not rolling very many dice. And Bella Doom's nearby, so suddenly he's at -2 dice and -1 damage, so even if he does happen to roll his crit, it's not dealing much to you. She doesn't really need levels. Her level abilities are pretty situational. Of course, as a demon, you pick the ability to level up into. So you can pick it based on whatever you need at the time or what your warband can benefit the most from. So probably pick suppress if you have a very condition-based warband. You like to inflict a lot of conditions like poison and burn. Pick Sunder Armor if you're going up against a bunch of res and you need armor cracking, or you can pick like Backlash versus enemies that like to use a lot of fate, like Rakir or Zonia, so that when they're trying to blow you up, you blow them up back. One of the unique things about Onkura again is she's actually Mil 7, which is higher than the sort of tank standard of 6, and she has Fly, so consider a Hunter's Knife on her. She's a surprisingly effective quote jungler, if you're familiar with MOBA terms, where she can fly over and hunt down monsters and help sweep off your backline pretty effectively with that Mil 7. Of course, the big call out for her is that she's vulnerable to non-melee attacks. So she's got Bark Skin, so she's Agi 3, Res 2 against melee attacks, but against ranged attacks, she's just Agi 3, which means you're going to get hit a lot, and Res 1, which is not great, especially if you're facing down, say, Astariel or Kogan, who have that built-in armor shredder. Agi 3, no res, is a pretty sad place to be, and she doesn't have that much more health to help her weather that. So be mindful of the matchups that you want to put her into. Next up, Thrommel. Now, Thrommel has incredibly high survivability thanks to his hit points and his level 2 immovable object ability, meaning that he can't be pushed around, he can't be knocked down, so you can't really push him into more vulnerable situations. Additionally, if you brought him in Ista, his base high health pool, plus of course his Agi 3, Res 2, means that he's probably not going to get one-rounded. And again, in Ista, you can get the Restoration Potion Sacred Artifact, which fully heals a hero. So if you're not one-rounding him, it's kind of tricky to chip away at his life only to see it completely restored via this Restoration Potion. So that's definitely something you could build for yourself and to watch out for your enemies. Now, his protective abilities aren't so great. His Bodyguard ability, which grants +2 res to a nearby friendly model who gets attacked, is probably one of the weakest Defender innate abilities. Remember that res caps at 2. So if you're using it on a friendly model that already has, say, 1 res, Only a net +1 res. You're only taking 1 damage off from that attack. It's not great. And then his other defensive ability is Fierce Challenge. But since that costs an action, you often don't have the actions for it because with his 2 AP Warhammer attack, most of the time you want to be moving and swinging that Warhammer. It's really only if he's already engaged with a model that he wants to attack, he bops them with his hammer, and then he's already where he wants to be, so he doesn't want to move, so he's just going to Fierce Challenge somebody, and it'll be a little bit of a benefit, but it doesn't actually come up very, very often. I will call out, though, that his where you're really going to get value from him is that 2-action Warhammer attack. So he's Mel 7 again, which is again higher than the normal tank for tanks. And look at that damage stat line: 4, 5, 7. Plus he has the ability Hammer Time, which can add an additional D3 true damage and knock a target down for a fate. And he's got his Concussive Blow, where it's if you just roll 1s, you can stun. So this actually both can deal a lot of damage. So you could say crit for 7, roll a 3 on your D3, do 10. And if you're on a Tauren Effigy power turn, you cut yourself for 2, deal another 2. Suddenly you've dealt 12 damage in one attack, 5 of which was true damage. So you can have tremendous offensive output. Additionally, his Dwarf Toss level 3 ability lets him knock down all enemies that he sort of leaps to and is adjacent to, so he can be a great offensive setup piece as well. But the one thing you'll notice here is that Hammer Time, Dwarf Toss, those are all Fate abilities, so he tends to want to use a lot of Fate and get those levels to get his level 2 and level 3. So consider that when you're building a warband. Consider that he's probably going to be a priority to feed levels and Fate too. Otherwise, though, he's pretty fantastic. Next up, Skye. So I've got a little asterisk on Skye here because he's not technically a tank. He is an enhancer bruiser, I think. But in terms of warband construction, he is often used for sort of that protect your friends and be have enough personal survivability that he can go into dangerous situations and sort of hold board position like tanks do. So his call out, of course, is that he's got the highest agi in the game of a base agi 6. This makes him particularly effective at actually tanking monsters, where even though monsters tend to have very high melee range magic stats, usually an 8, they only get to roll 2 dice against him. And since most of the monster maneuvers are also 2s, that makes it really unlikely that they're going to roll their maneuver, and the highest damage they can do is their solid track. Combined with his built-in regeneration and his Spirit Strike ability, his combat maneuver, that lets him heal, and groundwork, just in case they happen to roll that 2s knockdown, he's actually pretty good at tanking that hit and then just healing it back up. No big deal. The main thing, of course, you have to watch out for is since he is an agi-based tank, don't let him get ganged up on. If your opponent starts to get 2 or 3 or God forbid more gang up bonuses when going into Skye, he's going to crumple pretty quick. His HP is fairly low. Again, he is a decent jungler, thanks to, like I mentioned, his agi 6, so even if he doesn't end up killing the monster, he can take the hit back and then finish them off. He usually has actions for attacks, and because he's so mobile via his dash, which gives him another +1 movement on advance during an action, or during his turn, and his Heroic Stand ability, which lets him teleport next to a friendly model that gets attacked. He can be very mobile and make sure that he's staying relevant and back in the fight. His defensive abilities for his friends include Heroic Stand and Diversion, which lets him grant temporary health and a distraction via Heroic Stand, and Diversion lets him redistribute the damage that gets done to his friend, particularly onto heroes like himself that have regeneration, or nearby Minotaur, for example. Just make sure that you're redistributing damage before it's going to kill your ally, because otherwise it doesn't work. So his levels are fairly situational. His Dimension Warp ability is cool. It lets him bring a friend back to the effigy with him when he recalls. That unlike a normal effigy recall, that makes them immune to parting blows since it's just a place effect. Now that's kind of expensive since it's 2 actions to do that, and now you're taking 2 of your models out of the fight and bringing them back to the effigy. Skye can get back into the fight pretty quickly, again, thanks to his dash ability. But consider doing that with either when you really need to and you really want to hold on to the souls that that friendly model has, or if they're already a fast model themselves, like say Fazil, who can get to the effigy, heal up, and then get right back into the fight really quickly. Consider buying him, if you're planning on using this, the Ring of Teleportation, which makes an effigy recall cost 1 action instead of 2 actions. And you can play a lot of yo-yo and make sure that you can deny your opponent kills with this ability. His global invulnerability is decent. Sort of this bubble of +1 res. Again, it's a little situational. These tanks don't often see level 3. Cost of Fate. You're often better off just using Heroic Stand for that. But hey, if you're already winning and snowballing, not a bad thing to have. Finally, we get to Skoll. Now, Skoll's a bit more of a bruiser than a tank, but he's worth calling out in this tank category because Bulwark, I would argue, is the best defender ability in the game. It grants 5 temporary health to a nearby friendly hero. That's enough for 1 full crit from a primary damage dealer, or even multiple attacks from, say, a glance and a solid fruit. He can also, when he starts to get levels, get an absurd amount of hit points. He does have the highest hit point maximums in the game, up to 27 at level 3. Level 2 is about where I'd say he gets tanky enough to be considered a tank, I would say, where he gets that 24 base hit points. And then he also starts getting some interesting abilities when he gets to choose either level 2 Mystic or level 2 Warrior. Generally speaking, level 2 Warrior, since he already is kind of a bruiser, is sort of the default path. But you should look out for opportunities when the Mystic path is going to be particularly relevant to what you're fighting. His Mystic ability, or his Mystic Shield ability, lets him make a chosen model immune to ranged or magic attacks, which can be particularly helpful. You've got, say, a Soul Gazer hanging out near a Soul Pit, squaring off against an enemy Astariel, who's just ready to shred them. Or his Mesmerizing Gaze level 3 Mystic ability, which increases the cost of active abilities for enemies by +1 action. This is particularly painful for heroes that have offensive abilities that just cost 1 fate, so like Zhonya's Death Toll or Rakir's Toxin, Thrommel's Hammer Time. You suddenly make that cost 1 action and 1 fate, and they oftentimes just don't have the actions to use them anymore. So keep an eye out for when it would be relevant to pick the Mystic path, as it can be particularly potent into the right matchups. So here's another summary of our tanks and some basic commentary on synergies and cautions for them. In general, if you're looking for, I would say, the most survivable tank you can put into your warband, consider Doenregar, Thrommel, Lugdrug, or Marcus. Really want to make sure you can protect your friendly, important allied models, consider Marcus, Skye, and Skoll. If you're looking to get a little bit more offensive setup from your tanks, Marcus, Thrommel, Skoll, and then if you invest, Lugdrug or Onkura with Sunder Armor can help out with that. And then if you need just a little more personal oomph and damage coming out of your tank, Thrommel, of course, is a great one. Skoll being his bruiser self, situationally Onkura with her Mel 7, and Doenregar with that 5 damage crit are all worth considering when you're looking for a little bit more power from your offensive power from your tanks. That's it for the tank overview. Go ahead and join the Discord. I'll drop a link into the comments. And if you want, feel free to comment on which class breakdown you'd like to see next. We've got our soul lists, we've got our enhancers and controllers, and of course we've got our damage dealers and our assassins, bruisers, shooters, and snipers. So we'll probably break those up a little bit, but if there's a particular class or breakdown that you want to see, let me know in the comments and I can prioritize getting that video out. Thanks everyone, take care, and see you in the between.